Not too far from here, there is a town where residents, friends and family, visitors from far away, they all came together in pursuit of the particular kind of happiness that is a patriotic parade. Flags waving red, white, and blue everywhere, candy and music, bagpipes, marching bands, decorated floats, feats of dance and acrobatics, local community organizations and politicians all sharing their pride in what they do and in a country founded on the ideals of freedom, justice, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. Last year at this parade, one person nearby must not have felt equal, and he must not have felt that this country is just. He almost certainly did not feel happy because he felt a particular kind of freedom to take a gun to a rooftop and fire it into that happy, excited crowd. I don't know how to celebrate this holiday this year. Like some of you, my family and I were in that crowd. My kids, ages 9 and 12 at the time, were down by the curb. They certainly wanted to exercise another particular kind of freedom, the freedom to collect candy and trinkets. My husband, Ben, and I were more interested in the justice and equality of shade. Apparently, I'm not the only one thinking about the democratic resonances of physical experiences on this holiday. We stood on the steps in Port Clinton Square, under the trees where the round metal benches are, the ones that usually drip with ice cream and ring with the sound of kids on their skateboards, until we heard what sounded like loud firecrackers, the ones that make the pop, pop, pop. I remember odd details from what happened next. I remember the screaming. I remember dodging chairs and stairs as I ran from Central Street back into the alcoves on Port Clinton Square. I remember vaulting over a table that a man was turning sideways. And this dress, the dress I'm wearing now, tore as I tried to lay down. I scraped my elbow on a brick wall. I remember thinking at least just my elbow. I remember looking at my husband hiding behind a pillar a few feet away, my in-laws behind the next one over. And I remember that the man lying there next to me reminded me of a nurse who'd held my hand during surgery once years ago. This man kept urging me to stay down as I kept trying to lift my head to find my children. I remember the quiet that followed, the quiet into which I shouted my kids' names while other people shouted for a medic. I remember other things I will not share here. My phone records tell me it was only 10 minutes until I found my kids, but in my memory, it still feels like an eternity. My older child ran with her friends to one of their houses nearby. My younger child ended up alone, eventually finding a close family friend, and it was her fear that let him know that this had been real. When I finally was able to crush her body against mine, she said, "I never want to attend a parade again." And I said, I know, you don't have to, of course not. It's a year later, July 4th has crept up on me. I'm wondering how to celebrate this holiday, and I expect I'm not the only one. When trauma happens, the meaning of a day, a moment, or a holiday can change in an instant, forever altering one's experience of something that used to promise pleasure. Like so many in our area, I'm mourning the lives lost and injured, the innocence shattered, the thousands of people who can no longer hear fireworks or tolerate crowds or sleep easily in a place they thought was safe. I'm mourning, perhaps, the ease that came with celebrating the 4th of July, a relatively feel-good holiday usually. Hot dogs, cookouts, music, fireworks, a one-day break in the rhythm of summer's heat. Now it's not so easy. This date has baggage. I can't think of what happened at that parade without thinking of what day it was, what that day is supposed to celebrate, and how so much from a simple parade to our charged political landscape seems to be going so wrong. The parade had been so horrific, the contrast between the fluttering flags and the violent aftermath so stark, that it was easy to think in those first days afterwards that this time something would change. This tragedy on the date of our nation's founding would finally compel unwilling politicians to act. This time, thoughts and prayers would give way to action, and we'd see real change in this country on the intractable issue of gun violence. But even as Highland Park and the surrounding communities came together to chalk messages all over our little downtown, more shootings occurred, including in Chicago and Lake County, and particularly in communities of color and in socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. Even as survivors in Highland Park went to the high school for counseling for the adults and Squishmallows plus counseling for the children, I wondered, how will this situation change? Why are we getting these federal resources here when the communities that suffer the trauma of violence go every day without these resources? In the days and weeks after the parade, one thought among many kept coming back to me, no matter how unlikely or utopic it was. I want this to be the last time this happens to anyone. No one should have to live through anything like this ever again. Survivors of gun violence all seem to want action, especially for the communities hit hardest. And action needs to look both like common sense gun laws and the social and cultural changes that help people feel secure so they do not need to resort to violence in the first place. That is the sort of change that will make for true healing, that could make for what in Judaism is called tikkun olam, the healing of the world, and what in the Christian tradition has carried into our Unitarian Universalist tradition as the beloved community. So how to celebrate the 4th of July? Celebration may not be the right word. How can anyone touched by that parade celebrate the founding of this country when its ideals of justice and equality and the pursuit of happiness, even for something as simple as a parade, when those ideals feel so far-fetched? When those ideals are failing too many people and leading still to too much violence? As I've been thinking about this, words that rhyme with celebrate have been coming into my mind. Words like commemorate, consecrate, dedicate. Words like these are often quoted on July 4th with good reason, and I think you'll recognize some of them. And I'm quoting here. We cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave people, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. As none other than Abraham Lincoln said in this, the Gettysburg Address, the work for the living is to keep going with the unfinished work of our nation's new birth of freedom. Perhaps instead of celebrating July 4th, we here in the North Shore and surrounding communities must consecrate it. We must remember the parade, the lives lost, the lives injured and traumatized, holding that memory as sacred for working towards the fulfillment of the ideals on which this country was founded. We need to work towards a nation and a world in which people not only feel, but are safe and equal, in which justice is honest and fair, in which the happiness of one need not detract from the happiness of others. If the 4th of July can also be about working towards the beloved community, towards tikkun olam, then perhaps those of us who now struggle with the words will be able to say, have a happy 4th, and our hearts will finally feel less heavy.
I am so moved by the courage and power of Emily's words today. My heart is just so full of gratitude for those. And I've been thinking a lot about this impending anniversary, and I spent this last week, I went out to lunch with one of my dear friends in the area, a fellow minister, Quincy Worthington. He is the minister at the Presbyterian Church in Highland Park, and right now they are actually, a number of churches in Highland Park are doing a joint service, supposedly outside. I'm not sure. I hope that they had a backup plan for that. But I got to talk with Quincy, and I asked him what he was thinking about as he's preparing for this service, and we talked about a number of things. One of the pieces of advice that he was given, though, was one that I really puzzled over this week. The piece of advice was that he shouldn't, in his words and his reflections, talk about healing. He shouldn't talk about healing. And it was a comment that he made, and then we moved on and started talking about other things, so I didn't get to really ask him why that advice was given or what he thought was behind it. But it's something that I have been pondering this week. And what I've started to come to, the conclusion that I started to think of, the thought that could be behind that sentiment, don't talk about healing, is that it could be a sense in there that healing is this process that has this end point. At some point, we're no longer healing. At some point, we're healed. It's something that happened in the past. The effects no longer linger. We are no longer impacted by that. That is something that is in the past. Pauline Boss is a psychologist who's came up with this concept that has really inspired me to think about not only the heartache around gun violence in our world, but the heartache that we experience with a number of different tragedies in the world. This is the concept of ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss is the sense that a loss may be so complex that we're not able to name all of its components. A loss may be so complex that when we think we've come out the other side of it, we may discover that there's more healing to do. It's not something that happened in the past. It's something that we live with in the present. She calls her book The Myth of Closure. Closure, another word like healed. Closure, it's in the past. It's something that we're done with. And her thought is that too often when we talk about closure, when we talk about this final product, we start to think that there's some kind of timeline that we should be on, that we should be able to just move forward to this place and then finally settle in and say, yes, that is in the past. But as any of us who have experienced grief know, the effects of grief are ones that continue in ways that we can't even expect. We may years later hear a song or a poem or see something in a film that takes us back to the other side of grief. What we thought had been closed and healed is in fact open and still present. And then another piece that she talks about is that we may not even have a concept of what it is that we have lost yet. We may instead feel a sort of nebulousness around feeling unsafe or feeling that we have lost some sense of innocence or security, and it will only be a process of continued unfolding that we discover exactly what it is that we had lost, and we may not ever come to some neat conclusion around what that was. And so instead, we live in the mess. We live with the ambiguousness. We live with the loss. I do think that there are resources within our religious traditions that teach us deep concepts about how to live with that sort of ambiguity. Not all of them. Some religious traditions will try to put a neat period on things, right? I think that a lot of kind of ideas of paradise and utopia in religious thought, the idea that, either after we die or maybe we human beings here on earth, we can kind of pull together and like kind of bring about this kingdom in which there will be love and justice and wholeness and everyone will be healed and things will just be full and complete. Like that's a part of religious thought. But there are other stories, other resources. And one of them that I'm thinking of today comes from the Jewish tradition. And it is a concept that a mystic in the Middle Ages, a Jewish mystic in the Middle Ages, came up with about as he was contemplating what happened in creation and sort of how human beings live in creation. And he came up with this concept that God created 10 vessels of divine light. And God sent those forth into the world. And the thought was that if those vessels maintained their integrity, the world would be perfect and good and whole, and there would be no suffering. Unfortunately, the divine light that was inside of those vessels became so intense that it shattered the vessels, and the light scattered throughout creation, billions upon billions of sparks, more sparks than there are stars in the sky, more sparks than there are grains of sand on the beach. Now, the idea here is not that human beings or that God will gather up all of those sparks and put them back into the vessels. That is not possible. They are already scattered and lost. But human beings do have a role in this. The role of human beings is to gather up the sparks, to share those in community, to bring them to others in the world, to lift up that light. And in so doing, continue the work of healing, even as we know we continue to live with the heartache and with the loss. May that be the sacred work that we do here in this community and that we bring out into the world. May it be so. Amen.